I've been a landscape photographer for quite some time now, but if I could go back in time and tell my younger self 5 things that would really have made a big difference in those early days when I was struggling, these are the 5 things that I would tell my younger self. So number 1, don't angst over gear. I think gear is actually overrated, especially for the beginner. So in the hierarchy of what you need to become a really good landscape photographer, gear only comes 3rd in my list behind lighting and composition. Because if you haven't nailed lighting and composition, it doesn't matter what sort of fancy gear you've got, an expert with a cell phone will still take better photographs than you every time. And the reason I've put lighting as number 1 is because if you haven't got great lighting, even a really interesting or really good composition will still fall flat. And often it's lighting that makes it. When I'm at a location doing a reconnaissance, I'm often looking for good compositions that I'll come back to when the light's a little bit better or when the light's at its premium. So let's have a look at a few examples. So if you just rocked up on this hillside at lunchtime with a picnic and took this shot, this is what you might get. And it's, really not going to win any awards. But if you'd actually come early in the morning, you would have got a much more moody shot. This is 7:30 in the morning. But having arrived at 7:30, what I would do looking at this shot is anticipate that actually the sun is going to come up through a gap in the clouds in about 15 or 20 minutes. So I'll just wait, and this is the sort of shot you get, which is much more dramatic and much more interesting than the first 2 shots. What about this example here? Let's say you're on a really early morning walk and you come across this scene at 5:45 in the morning, it's dawn, and it's quite nice, it's a lovely soft light, but you realise the sun is going to come up in about 45 minutes, so you come back to the same location and this is what you can get. Much more dramatic in my view. A few minutes later the sun's actually gone and you've lost that opportunity. So you often only get a very narrow window of opportunity when taking landscape compositions. You need to match great light with a great composition to get a really winning shot. And the thing about composition and lighting is they cost nothing to learn. If you're motivated, you can just about learn as much as you need to know or more than you need to know on YouTube or the internet in general. It's quite easy to get caught into the trap of waiting till you get this camera or waiting to get this particular lens before you go out and actually start doing some photography. But in reality, you can get fantastic winning shots with just a tripod, a basic camera, and a budget lens, a budget zoom lens. And in fact, early on when I was just using a very budget zoom lens, a Canon zoom lens, I took these shots here and they've all been printed successfully quite large. Some of them won awards and competitions. So you can do really good things with quite basic, not expensive equipment. And if budget is a problem, there's a huge second-hand market of really high quality camera gear and lenses available and tripods. The reason I say a tripod is often if you're wanting to get really dramatic landscape shots, they're often taken in dim light around sunset or sunrise or even dawn or dusk. And having a tripod really ups the quality of what you can get because often your exposures will be fairly long. And also a tripod forces you to slow down and be a bit more considerate as well, or considered in what photographs you're taking. So number 2 is planning. In the early days, I missed a lot of opportunities because of a lack of planning or getting too late to a scene. And this is something that's changed a lot over the years as I've grown as a photographer. What's quite interesting is the light's completely gone from that hill now. So it's worth being quick, but not hasty. So not bothering with the tripod and just making sure you get the shots. Get something in the bag because it might be the last of the sun that I get. So quite pleased to have got those shots. So here's the thing, you might think a successful landscape photographer goes to a location, exercises their patience and waits for the light, gets the magic shot and then goes home. But the reality is quite different. So often you will spend a lot of time at a location, but then the sun might pop out for just 5 minutes and you've got 5 minutes to get, the best shots of the day. And do you go over here? Do you go here? Do you prioritize this shot? It can be quite frenetic in those 5 minutes. The other thing is you want to be prepared for the conditions. So if it's cold and wet or windy, maybe you need some wind protection and rain protection, some gloves perhaps, and even something to secure your tripod if it's really windy. You're not always in the best headspace if you're cold and hungry. So even being prepared in that respect can help a lot. So all of these things can be solved by a little bit of planning, and that means planning when you're at a location, so arriving early enough to scout around and make a few plans. And planning before you get to a location is a big one as well. So planning can include practicing with your camera and just knowing where all your settings are and what you need to know. And also giving yourself plenty of time to get to the location early. I always try and work backwards now. So if I want to be at a location for the light at a certain time, then I work out how long it's going to take to get from the road to the location, how long it's going to take to bike to the end of the road or take a car to the end of the road, exactly how long I need, and then I build in a buffer of maybe 30 minutes just in case something happens on the way, because I've missed a lot of opportunities by arriving just a little bit late to a scene. So number 3 is mistakes. I love mistakes. Mistakes feel like progress. Now let me explain this. So the thing about making mistakes is when you're making mistakes, you're probably pushing your boundaries, and to develop or grow as a landscape photographer, you need to be pushing your boundaries. So mistakes are part of that process. The thing about a mistake is if you really mess up and miss a shot, that can be quite painful and really disappointing. So it really embeds that mistake in, so you're less likely to do it again. The thing with mistakes is not to beat yourself up too much or throw in the towel, but to learn from your mistake and set up some sort of system to avoid having that mistake happen in the future. For example, I've got lots of routines and systems now that avoid things happening, and I have done all these things, like forget memory cards, run out of memory card space, arrive at a location with flat batteries. In the film days, I've taken lots of great shots, I thought, without even any film in the camera. So I've got lots of systems in place now. For example, when I return from a shoot, no matter how late it is, the thing I do without fail is offload the images from the memory card. That way I can be sure that I won't accidentally overwrite images. So that's something that it's just non-negotiable and that I do every time. Another thing I'll do is recharge batteries the day before a shoot, or if I've come in from let's say a sunset shoot and I want to go out at sunrise, then I'll charge the batteries overnight. So a lot of these things are systems that I don't even have written down, or I don't even have checklists anymore. They're just things that I do every time. They're what I call the non-negotiables. So number 4 is a good photograph is knowing where to stand. A fairly famous Ansel Adams quote. And it took me a long time to get my head around this, because when I started out, I used to think of photographs in terms of lenses. So a wide angle lens would give me this sort of look or this feel, and a telephoto lens would give me this kind of compressed sort of feel. Nowadays, I tend to think of more about where do I stand. The other trap I fell into early on was using a zoom lens to get closer to a subject rather than thinking about, in the first instance, using my feet. Because in fact, the arrangement of elements in a scene is really controlled by your position in the scene. So if you want to make a tree bigger in relation to what's behind it, you need to move closer to that tree, or vice versa, rather than using a zoom. So here's an example where I've changed lenses while moving in closer to a scene, and you can really see the effect of those trees in the foreground staying the same size, but the relationship to the background changes completely. And that also applies to getting low or getting high or getting unusual angles. A mantra of mine when I'm uninspired by a particular scene is keep moving and something eventually will fall into place. So number 5 is knowing the importance of editing and also knowing when not to edit. Now let me explain. I think there's a lot of merit to getting it right as much as possible in camera, and indeed that's what I endeavour to do when I'm out and about. And if you do follow this mantra, often there's very little editing that's needed on an image straight out of the camera. And in fact, if you do edit an image too much, it can make it worse. So I think it's important to develop your judgment and skill to know when an image is actually pretty good as it is and not to overwork it and perhaps make it worse. The opposite of this mantra is probably I'll fix it later in Photoshop, and I think that's a bad approach generally because it encourages laziness out in the field, and also you create a lot of work for yourself after the photo shoot, and the work may or may not be convincing. So getting it right in camera can involve a little bit of work in the field. Like, for example, I will often move road cones or tidy up a scene, remove a bit of debris, rather than endeavour to do it later in Photoshop. And on the other hand, knowing what you can achieve in post-processing really changes the way you photograph, because suddenly you see possibilities where you might have thought there's not really a shot to be had there. And this can involve things like multiple exposures, bracketing for focus, so focus stacking, knowing how to do that in post-processing, or even something I use all the time, which is putting my finger in front of the sun when I'm shooting into the sun. And that avoids lens flare or softening the light on the foreground. But you need to combine that with an image without your finger, and this can really only be done in Photoshop by combining the two images using a mask and painting out the layer with the finger in it to get the combined complete shot. And this is another good reason for knowing some of these skills, these post-processing skills. And actually it's also a good reminder that probably the most bang for buck thing you can learn in post-processing software like Photoshop is to master layers and layer masking. That really opens up so many possibilities for advanced editing. It's a bit beyond the scope of this video, but yeah, I would definitely encourage you to learn as much as you can about layers and layer masking. So a good edit or performance in Ansel Adams terminology can really make or break an image. So it's really worthwhile developing your skill and your judgment in this area and not underestimating the impact that good judgment and appropriate processing can have on the success of an image. So that's the 5 things that I wish I'd got to grips with sooner, and it would have accelerated my learning in landscape photography. So what about you? What have been your biggest bottlenecks to progressing or advancing your landscape photography? I'd really be curious to know. Let me know in the comments, and if you're interested in following this up with a video series on composition, I've left some links above and in the description below. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.